Hello, everyone. How are you? I am so excited that you're all here joining us today. Thank you so much. Let me get my notes up. Wonderful. Welcome again, everyone. American University sits upon the ancestral and traditional lands of the Nacotchtank and Piscataway people. I acknowledge with gratitude the Native communities and nations on whose ancestral lands we live, study, work, and rest. I offer our respect to the members of these nations. And if you would please include the link to nativeland.ca, that would be wonderful. I would encourage everyone to click on that link to see where you are in the world. We acknowledge the lives and experiences and contributions of the African and African American and immigrant communities that have enabled and continue to contribute to the building of this country. I'm Zoe Charlton, faculty in the MFA Studio Art program. It's always great to talk with other artists about their ideas and their practices. The US Census Bureau's 2020 demographic data lists the DC population at 689,545. And of that number, roughly 1.1% of the population is documented as American Indian or Alaska Native. So, conversations about climate change must include discussions about race, gender, and sexuality. In 1982, Benjamin Chavez described the ways that communities of color and economically disadvantaged populations and communities who have been minoritized are more often affected by climate crisis as environmental racism. From the perspective of queer ecology, Estraven Lupino Smith uses a series of practices and methodologies in the field to reimagine a series of practices that reimagine nature, biology, and sexuality through queer theory. Catriona Sandelin states in Queer Ecology Keywords for Environmental Studies that the binary or dualistic categories of natural and unnatural, alive and not alive, or human and not human don't work, when in reality, nature exists in a continuous state. Priya Subberwal wrote, the idea of wilderness is one that erases indigenous ownership of the land and instead paints it as empty, pristine, and a place to be conquered and colonized by those in positions of power. So she says that queering ecology is the act of broadening our understanding of our relationships with the larger world, the world that is more than human. And it's so fitting that we're talking with Jaimes Mayhew today. I've been following Professor Jaimes Mayhew's work for almost 13 years, and it's wonderful to now be teaching with him. Jaimes makes participatory, interdisciplinary work that addresses identity and how it's expressed through land use, speculation, and ecology. From installation, photography, and video to fiber art and performance, Mayhew's work is conceptually tied together through experimentations of queering relationships between humans, places, and things. They have exhibited nationally and internationally, and reviews of their work have appeared in Hyperallergic, Art Papers, and the Creators Project, among others. An article about Jaimes Mayhew's work, titled Performing Trans Ontology, the Body and Body of Work of Jaimes Mayhew, was published in the academic journal Feminist Frontiers in late 2020. Jaimes holds an MFA in Intermedia and Digital Art from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and a BA in Film from Emerson College. He currently teaches graduate and undergraduate classes in the Studio Art program at American University. And with that, Jaimes, I welcome you to begin your slide presentation. Hi, just a minute. We're going to pause for a second, and I'm going to have James start again because he's muted.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
That's okay.
You know what? I get a second chance to do the intro even better.
And
Unless you can read lips, what I had said before was thank you so much to um, everyone who was involved in organizing the Seeing Climate Change Symposium. And also to Zoe. It's been so great getting to know her over the past, few years. And I'm just really grateful to be here. So thank you all so much. So I'm going to start with a couple of quotes just to kind of frame where I'm coming from with my work currently, and also like looking through some older work in order to talk about why I am where I am basically. So Zoe mentioned Kate Sandilands, Seberwall, and Lupina Smith in the introduction. So I have a couple of quotes that are about queer ecology. And so I'll read this first one from Kath Weston. Environmentalism and queer politics seldom seem to intersect. This dislocation rests on a narrow association of ecology with visible landscapes and sexuality with visible bodies bounded by skin. In the pages of journals, as in popular culture, attractions may range far afield, but the field itself merely offers a place to suffer or to frolic, a simple backdrop for the playing out of sexual politics. And that's Kath Weston from A Political Ecology of Unnatural Offenses. And the next one is another quote from Kate Sandilands with Bruce Erickson. Rural queers threaten the still pervasive assumption held by many Americans that rural space is heterosexual and therefore natural, and urban space is homosexual and therefore unnatural. So I'm going to start with the beginning of a lot of my work and my interest in queer ecology, and also environmentalism and how all of those things tie together. This is an image that my friend Jessica Harvey took. This is from, I spent a year in Iceland on a Fulbright about 10 years ago. And my project was to go around the country and talk to people about electricity production. And the way that I did this was through, social practice kind of work. So I built this bicycle that had a stand. And then you can see that there are lights on there. So you could ride the bicycle and, illuminate these LED lights. And then I also had a little table that folded out in the back. And I would bring postcards with me so that people could fill out either in Icelandic or English a story about electricity for them. And what was really interesting about this was, I talked to a lot of elder people who had stories about when they got their first either, like Iceland had distributed at one point these small kind of little wind turbines that could go on people's houses so that they could get electricity in rural spaces because it's a very you know, uh, not densely populated place, and so wouldn't make sense to try to run electricity the way that we do in a lot of places here or in more densely populated spaces. Um, and the other part of it too is I learned about this group of artists that had organized a big protest for um, a, an electric plant that was going to be a hydroelectric plant that was going to be underneath a waterfall in a rural part of eastern Iceland that was going to be feeding an Alcoa aluminum smelting plant. And this is kind of where I got really interested in this because they were, for a place where, at that time when I was there, the population was about 330,000 people. And there were thousands of people that went to this protest. And it's not, it wasn't easy to get to. So, it took people a lot of intention and work to get there. protest this. And part of this, like I'm interested in um, the way that Iceland is sort of, this idea of extraction, which I definitely am interested in. So, like extracting energy and extracting resources in order to, from multinational corporations in this place. So that's kind of what I was researching there. So some of this manifested as more performative kinds of things. So this is a hydroelectric or I'm sorry, a hydrothermal plant that's down kind of like near, if anybody's familiar with the Blue Lagoon, probably the most like touristy place you can go to there. So this is right next to it. And this is me producing electricity on my bike for a glow light for the Moss, in front of the aluminum factory, which is also taking, or I'm sorry, not aluminum, the geothermal plant, which is also taking water from the ground and producing electricity. This is another one that I made in East Iceland, in a town that was about as close as a town could be to the plant, the Alcoa plant that I mentioned before. So Alcoa had actually, invested in this town and built, there's a big hydrothermal pool culture in Iceland. And so there was, there was a pool that Alcoa had built for the community right up the road from where this residency was. And the other thing that I thought was really interesting that we see sometimes even in the States with rural communities, like the promise of jobs. So, Alcoa was kind of allowed to move into this place with the promise that, it would create X amount of jobs or whatever. But what happened was, because Alcoa didn't really pay people very well or give them very good benefits, none of the Icelandic people wanted to work for them. And so then what happened was a lot of Polish people and people from Eastern Europe wound up immigrating to this small kind of like tri-town area in order to work there. So then there was this whole other sort of like adjustment that the culture had to make around that. And this is another one, just I am making energy, which is a reference to a John Baldessari piece, if anyone's familiar, where he's just saying I am making art. And is making a gesture that's kind of similar to the two middle figures. But this is meant to be like a human, like a human dance piece almost of an electric plant. So the other thing that I got really interested in with this is, so I'm transgender, and this, this part of identity really tied into me with the way, this was my first kind of work that I was making about this, extractive process. And I should say here that, I come from a family, of people out west who, my grandfather was, would basically look for places to mine for uranium during the uranium boom in like southeastern Utah, near Moab, Utah. So I spent a lot of time, kind of around mining, around these extractive ideas. My grandfather had his envelopes for his business had like a little picture of a baby, and then it showed like what minerals a baby would need, throughout its entire life, just sort of like pointing to it. So really into this extractive kind of culture. So and my father, made maps for mining companies for a living. So I was really thinking about this and thinking about the resources for electricity production. So these are based off of Fluxus Instruction Works. And this is called Ways to Change the Body Land. And it's, I was really thinking about how we see value and like where those places are shared between, our bodies, and also land, because it, a lot of times under capitalism or this sort of like, I keep using the word extractive, but, like the things that we can see value the things have to be seen as being valuable, I guess, or being progressive, or like being able to like get something from it in order to be worthwhile in a kind of way. So these are just instruction works based on Fluxus instruction works of, you know, things that could be applied to either a body or a landscape. So, you know, when I say assess value, I mean like you can have, you know, you can decide how much you're going to sell something for. Or you can also like decide what the value of somebody's body is, you know. And I was really coming at this from a trans perspective, but I think that this could be used in a lot of ways to apply to a lot of different kinds of bodies and how they're valued. Um, attempting to preserve the current state, making a sale, interrupting growth, making an addition. And this is another version of it. And all of these images are images that I took out of car windows, kind of driving through places where there may be. The first one was in Iceland, and so that was near a power plant. And then this next one is actually right outside of the Hoover Dam. So you know, these are other ways. So claiming ownership, harnessing energy, determine the distance of the future, estimate a life expectancy. And a lot of this is also about, you know, when you're queer, you know, how much are you willing to kind of like adapt yourself in order to be seen as valuable by, this is coming from a really personal sense of, in order to be seen as valuable by other people, or, you know, be able to access, you know, jobs and privilege and, you know, all of those kinds of things. So this is a performance that, you know, kind of came out of that. So thinking about, you know, what's natural and what's unnatural, or any of those things, I discovered in some research that ice that is frozen in a natural way, which would be like outside or something like that, without electricity, basically, is considered to be a mineral. But ice that is in your refrigerator, like in your freezer, like ice cubes, is not considered to be a mineral, even though like they're kind of similar things. So I made this performance with a young artist named Alexa Mang, and who had worked with me on some other projects, and it's called Ways to Change Ice. So we made up all of these tools of how to melt ice cubes, and then, you know, we got some ice that would have been considered not a mineral, because we don't have a lot of glaciers around Baltimore, Maryland. So we did not go to a glacier to get ice, but we did get this. And then we, you know, invited people to, you know, help us change the ice in whatever way, and to use the tools. And with the, you know, the very clear instruction that the goal was not to melt the ice fast, you know, but to play, you know, and figure out how you could melt it. So this is a very brave human just touching it with their bare hands. um, so, you know, after Iceland, I'm going to go through some of this work kind of quickly, but I was really thinking about queering our relationship to electricity. So if anybody's ever driven on 95 coming into Baltimore City, you've probably seen this incredibly prominent structure, the Bresco Tower, that says Baltimore up this side. This is actually an electricity producing plant that burns trash in order to generate electricity. And at the time when I made this piece, the Bresco plant was considered to be sustainable because, you know, it's coming from, you know, a resource of trash, basically. Um, it's kind of or renewable, I'm sorry, but I found that to be like really disturbing. And we have two of these. We have another one that's like a little bit south of here, and we'll talk a little bit later, hopefully, about, you know, um, also the fact that a lot of these plants are built in where, you know, mostly poor Black people in Baltimore specifically live. But this is also true. I did a lot of research in Boston, as well. So this happens really frequently. Um, this is another idea of queering electricity. So this is, another bike that produces small amounts of electricity. And then I built a hydroelectric turbine sort of model out of paper. And the idea is about this utility. It's about that it would never work. This actually spins the wrong way when the bike is ridden, and would also, if it got wet, would just completely deteriorate. Like it's kind of useless in a way. And I think that, by trying to kind of aestheticize this relationship to electricity production, for me, it helps me kind of um, explore, what progress is in a lot of ways, because a lot of a lot of these extractive practices and, electricity production and all of that kind of stuff is really based on this idea of progress and like how we're going, what the next step is and like what the logical step is for capitalism and making money. Um, and a good friend of mine who is an amazing radical fairy, if anyone knows what those are, has a great quote. He says, "Progress isn't going anywhere that I want to go," and I agree with that. Um, So we'll get into these. These are more images that I took out of a window near the Hoover Dam. And then I really was, curious about what would happen if I put them into Photoshop and had Photoshop auto stitch all of these together. So essentially, each of these next few images in the Post Landscape series is maybe 40 photographs that Photoshop has decided fit together really well. And the reason I was interested in this is because, you know, Photoshop will do this a little bit with the landscape out here, but you really can't make mistakes like this until you get into, um, all of these electrical towers that run along the highway going to the Hoover Dam. And it puts them together, kind of wrong, and I was really interested in figuring out how to collaborate with a machine like that, or with software, and how to get it to make mistakes. Also, as a way of, so you can see that, maybe Photoshop will go in and like repeat a few things in the background, but really, the biggest mistakes are always with these more kind of artificial structures that are, that have symmetry that might all be exactly alike. So it tries to piece them together that way. Um, yeah. So maybe even making mazes of towers. So this is a tapestry that's, I think it's about 12 feet long by about 8 feet tall, called Niagara Falls Without Water. This is this is the American Falls, and the water is often is turned off like pretty frequently. Of Niagara Falls in order to prevent erosion, which I just found to be like, you know, uh, just really queer logic in a way, queer and strange, that, that a water is there to kind of erode, a lot of times. But, it's also that, this piece of land has become really valuable for tourism. So it's a way of like trying to preserve that natural beauty that is just a little bit hilarious, I think. So this is based off of a photograph that was taken in 1969. And then I made this tapestry out of all found fabric from a thrift store in 2014 to put it together. And this was part of a Provisions Library research grant. So thinking, I got really interested in this idea of the the social history and and also like our body's relationships to landscape in a much more direct kind of way after that work. Um, and this was a huge turning point for me in the way that I was thinking about environmentalism and and also like what makes us care about or what can make groups of people care about environmentalism and like care about the issues that are going on around them. And a lot of that actually starts with being able to care about ourselves and knowing that we are cared for in a way. So this is a project called Same Seas Island. It's really grew organically with a group of friends who were all, transgender men like myself. And, this is an imaginary utopian island for trans men who love other trans men. And the idea with this really came out of a series of jokes. Every time we would hang out, we would just make jokes about all of the ridiculous things that would be on Same Seas Island if it existed. And even groups of, our friends that were queers in Baltimore referred to us as the Samesies after a while. It was almost like we'd like formed our own band without having to make music. So um, we made this project, I sat everybody down. There were 5 of us in the original group and at my kitchen table one night, and we just drew everything that they wanted. And then I brought that back in and made it into one more kind of like coherent map. But this is in collaboration with Milo, Jack, Mickey, Asa, and myself. And I'll show you kind of a detail. And oh, also one thing that I want to like point out too is that this not only has access to healthcare, which is so important for trans people, and especially we started working on this maybe 5 years ago. Things are a little bit better now because people at least know that trans men exist, but um, it's also talking it's really hard to find even a primary care doctor who's not going to discriminate against you. And I think that this is true for lots of marginalized people. And we also have a place that like will cut your hair because like sometimes it can be an issue if you go get your hair cut and the person who's cutting your hair decides that you really are a girl, and they're going to cut your hair so that you look more like you have like a I would always call it like a Texas pixie cut, instead of having a, like an actual masculine haircut. Um, it's important to be able to have access to all of those things. Clothes that fit, like trans men tend to be shorter, and being able to get access to any of those things. Universities, and then up here, because I mentioned that we spent a lot of time in Moab, Utah growing up. I wanted access to landscape and like being able to go to the places that I loved and really draw inspiration for me without having the fear of the people that were there, the fear of the people, because I, growing up, spent a lot of time in rural spaces in Colorado and Utah. And the more queer it was apparent that I was as I got older, the the less I felt comfortable there and the less other people were comfortable with me. Um, so that was why I would actually bring things in here. I also, like there's Coney Island down here. I wanted to bring Coney Island in because that was always a place of real joy for me in my 20s and 30s. And um, it also was a kind of scary place to be after dark as a trans person because the bathrooms were not very safe to be in there. So this is just a close up. So there's a lot of inside jokes in here. It's okay if you don't get it, but part of the joy is sort of that we have the internet, and if people are curious, they can look it up, like what possibly like some of these things might mean. Like maybe some people won't get Keyhole Bridge, but and that's totally okay. But the other joy is like being able to show this to younger trans men. Like that's my joy, that they can see this and see themselves in some of this and know, there's like one thing out there with a bunch of like really dumb possibly immature jokes, about, just the identity of being trans and also like finding joy in that. So this is part of an installation that was at Arlington Arts Center a few years ago. I took old vacation photos from all of the people involved in Same Seas Island, and then we turned them into postcards as though we were sending them to our families from this island. So there's also letters on the back of each of these. There's another shot, and so this is called the Wave of Mutilation, which is a part of Same Seas Island. It's an inflatable sculpture. It's about 4 by 8 feet on the bottom and about 19 feet tall, depending on where it's installed. But the idea with the Wave of Mutilation is that this is how trans men and the Same Seas got to Same Seas Island, was that we rode this wave of mutilation, which is also, if any of you are fans of the Pixies, which is a 90s band, that it's also a reference to that. But it's this idea that a lot of times if you're a trans person who medically transitions, people try to tell you that you're mutilating your body by going through whatever medical treatment you decide that you want to. But this wave is actually testament for us to the fact that it's not mutilation, and that's only a myth. That like this wave is imaginary, which is why it's made of like fabric and air. Because as soon as the fan gets turned off on the back of this inflatable, it becomes small enough to fit into a box, and it's nothing. So this next series is it's a series of photographs that kind of relate to a lot of the issues that we talked about in Same Seas Island and with that body of work. This is in collaboration with Lamont Stanley Bryant, who is a psychologist, and we were really interested in the idea of like how a body really relates to rural spaces, and also like being really careful about the way that we're addressing these ideas that I think Zoe brought up in the very beginning of this talk, between like what we consider to be wilderness and wild, and all of those things, being really careful about that, but really just trying to directly address what it means for different bodies to be in rural spaces, and this idea of belonging, even, and um, I will say, like, something that Lamont talks about a lot with this project is, why do white people get all the good spaces? Which is a really good question, because it's also like we took those first. We as in white people took those spaces first, and then also made them dangerous for people who are not white to inhabit in a lot of ways, and also straight people. So this is in Castle Valley. This is close to Moab, Utah, and the way that we make this work is that we got a little bit interrupted with this process with COVID because of not being able to be with other people, and I'll show you some of that in a minute. But this was one of the first photographs as a part of this series. We brought some fabric with us to Utah. We hand dyed this whole cloak, and this is also like we hand waxed all of it too to get that texture so it would look like the rocks. And the idea is what we call hyperinvisibility, with the in sort of in parentheses, so it can be about hypervisibility and hyperinvisibility at the same time, and how that flux of things work in identity, within a landscape, and then also with the people who are in a landscape sharing it with you. This is Kalama in Western Maryland. So this is another person that we took to Western Maryland, and the place where we shot this, like there's a Walmart nearby, and so we try to get as many of the supplies as we can from quote local sources. So where this is, there's a big hunting culture, and we just grab whatever fabric or whatever we can from those spaces. And it's really important to just spend 2 or 3 days in a place with the person who we're going to be photographing, working on some kind of, camouflage or, outfit or whatever it is with them, with things that we find in the area, like locally sourced, and really talking about what hyperinvisibility means. So the story with Kalama in this, like she has been a close friend of mine and Lamont's for several years, and she had just finished turning in her dissertation, which is about re-witnessing and being re-traumatized by violence that's posted on social media. So, for example, like police killings of Black people and things like that. So that's, she had just turned it in, and really she wanted to be invisible and just hide everything. And that's kind of what we talked about with this. So like the photograph winds up being made collaboratively through an entire process. Like we try to direct some, but like it's about the direction of the people that we're working with as well. So this is another one of Lamont and Hunter's Ridge. And this is, all of the makeup, everything is from the hunting aisle, aside from the lipstick, of course. But, everything that we could get from Walmart again, which is kind of, about wanting to really like queer the culture, like the materials of the culture that are in those kinds of spaces. Like hunting is uh, seen to be, and like Lamont used to have to hunt with their father or their stepfather when they were a kid. So, and didn't really want to because they're really, not because they're femme identified, but like it wasn't a part of their identity or what they wanted. So, trying to find ways that you could, maybe reappropriate these materials. This is also from one of the first shots. I'm in here running away. And I think this relates back to the idea that we don't want to be, or I don't always want to be in these spaces, even though I love them, that I'm like, I feel a little bit fearful. And so, wanting to blend in and run away, but also be seen at the same time. Um, and holding all of that, in one place with these. So this is the last one. This is Diana in Deep Creek. And, what I love about this one is we have several photos, and I didn't include them in this slideshow, but Diana is she's from Queens, New York. She really was excited about doing this shoot, but like even getting her to, and I have questions about this, of course, like, but I love telling this story about her. Like she wanted to have her Nikes showing, in the photo, and, all of these things. So we have like some of those along with it. I ultimately, we wound up taking this photograph, and it looks like just one of her favorite tarot cards, actually. Like it's kind of uncanny how much it looks alike. But talking about invisibility with her, like she doesn't like walking on dirt, or any of those kinds of things, because she grew up in a city, and like that is not um part of like how she grew up in her culture. So like there's also this whole other question of, does an image just represent the thing that you're looking at that's right in front of you, or can you tell more stories kind of about how that came to be, and have that be a part of the work as well. Yeah, so I wanted to, I don't know, I can open it up for questions. And, I'm really curious about, you know, I guess that what I'm really curious about with my work right now, and I'm getting ready to start into a new project, which is going to be kind of based on Samesies Island maps, but with different groups of LGBTQ AI plus people in Baltimore City. That'll be an atlas, because I really feel like um, we we have to enter into these like levels of care, communities of care, and it has to be not just about it has to be about multiple things, I guess. Like I'm really, I want this sort of multiplicity, and I want people to feel like they are cared for, because you can't really, like if you can't access healthcare, if you have a, like have a hard time getting access to food or, education, or, like any of those things, I think it's going to be really hard to also care about environmentalism. And of course, like we all know that, a lot of it should not be falling on the individual anyway. But I think that, it's it's hard to, you know, I guess what I want is for it not to be too late, so that, so that people are able to access everything that they need, and that includes like being able to care about the, like the larger pictures with environmental justice. So with that, I will end the show, and thank you all so much, and turn it over to Zoe, who I think is going to be moderating the discussion afterwards. Zoe, I think you're muted.
You know what? Technology, right? Uh-huh. Unmute. Thank you so much, James. That was wonderful. Wonderful to hear about your work, and how you talked about your work through the lens of feminism and queer ecology, and and to really tie it into aspects of environmental racism. So we do have some questions in the chat, and I'll intersperse those between some of the questions um, that I have for you. And I'd love to start with the Hidden in Plain Sight series, since that's the last one that you ended with. It's a, like you said, it's a collaboration with Lamont Stanley Bryant, and it's a photo series that explores the hyperinvisibility or visibility of LGBTQIA plus people and the artist's intersecting identities by creating and documenting in an ad hoc way. Um, collaborative camouflage costumes and alliteration and photography. Could we talk a little bit more about the Plain Sight series? Specifically, what happens when you're confronted with difference in the environment? And so you talked a little bit about one of your participants wanting to be both visible and invisible, and yourself wanting to be in the place that you love, but also it might be a site of unsafety. So what happens when you're confronted with differences in the environment? And how do you continue to explore that in your work?
I think what I love about this project so much is that, for Lamont and I, who have, we have very different backgrounds and experiences in these kinds of spaces, and, just even, the places where we were when we grew up. And then also with the people that we choose to photograph, is that we're constantly learning about these differences. And so like the real key is to be listening to other people's experiences, which is why it's important that we spend 2 or 3 days with participants. It's also always luxurious to have an excuse to rent a cabin somewhere so that we can do a photo shoot, but it's also about listening and learning how other people feel about it, and, leaving it open and not prescribing our own ideas onto other people, but rather, collaborating with it. So like trying to let go of control a little bit.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that that leads right into um, a question that Chelsea Anderson has posed is the difference between your research and art is amazing. Chelsea says, this is something that a lot of artists struggle with. Can you talk more about how you balance the research that you do and the information that you collect and your work itself, your creations?
I think for me, I started, when I really learned to understand what research in artwork means and how it can impact and influence the work and make work a lot better. I was in undergrad and I was a film major, but then I was working with all of these performance artists in this group called the Institute for Infinitely Small Things.
Mhm. Yeah.
And we wore lab coats and we would not tell people we were artists, because if we told people we were artists, people wouldn't listen, and made a lot of work. And for me, before that, I had been, I was kind of making some little videos, and some film and stuff like that. But what that did for me was it really informed me that, the more that I can feed my mind, even if I'm not going to be directly using all of the information that I gather in my research, it's going to come out in my work, and make it better and stronger. So I still, I think it's so important to be reading a lot, to be curious about things, and to really like remain open, so that, I do find that it makes stronger work. And I think a lot of times with art, what's amazing about it is that it comes out through a subconscious kind of like flow, and you don't realize that, oh, that's like actually referencing Kate Sandilands or whatever it is, until later on, and that's perfectly fine. Yeah,
Thank you.
great
Thank you.
question.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Chelsea. A next question is, so I'm thinking about your map series, the Same Sea series. Much of the land that we live and work on is colonized. What does it mean to belong and recreate or curate a place for folks that may have been colonized by others? Would you talk more about the Same Sea series and how it relates more specifically to environmental issues that you are um, you are contending with now? What specific environmental issues are important to you, and how does that relate to the Same Sea series?
Yeah. There was an artist, Mary Ellen Strom, who was at AU just a couple of weeks ago, talking, and she said something that, she's so smart, but she said, maps are a tool of the colonizer, also because like they're meant to be reproduced. So, and I don't have a really, I'm embarking on this like second part of this series where I'm actually going to be a cartographer making maps based on other people's ideas who are not like me, in the most in an ideal world. Like we will not share very many intersections. So, and I'm not really sure, but I'm like definitely keeping that in my mind about what it means to make a map of an imaginary place that you have no intention of ever, having it be, a real sort of occupied place. But I think it does address colonialism in that way, of how you use colonial tools to make work, and what that means.
Right. How you use colonial tools to make work. That I'm going to remember that statement. We're often in the space of doing that. Something that you're also talking about is a kind of involuntary or unexpected collaboration, right, with a source, right, with another person that may be living or not living, right? We have this object that they've created. And so Sarah has asked a question, Sarah Leary, that collaboration seems to play a large role across the body of work that you've made, both from fellow artists and from participants. Could you talk more about the collaborative process?
Yeah, it comes from, I mean, I gave a talk about a year ago about my my roots in queer punk culture in Seattle, in the early 2000s, and I credit all of it with that. I credit all of that with being queer, actually. And like many queer people, was, when I was younger, was kind of uh needed to find chosen family, in a really kind of urgent sense, and things are different now. But mom, if you're listening, it's fine. But this idea that culture does not happen on your own. You can't make new culture or make new ideas if you're sitting by yourself in a studio. Like I really don't like that kind of model. Really doesn't work for me. So I think that it's through the discovery of other people, and through sort of I got to make up my own family structures, and what all of those things mean. I've got siblings all over the place that look nothing like me, and that's really important to me. Um, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to just be mindful of our time and our audience's time and yours. And I think we have time for about three more questions, maybe two. So I would know that this one is particularly important to you because you've thought a lot about the body's relationship to the environment, about quality of life and extractive practices and queer ecology. You brought up extractive practices multiple times throughout your presentation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some folks' positionality makes them more aware of the relationships between climate change, environmental challenges, and their bodies, and those discriminatory or extractive practices. I would appreciate hearing from you how, if or how your practice contributes to conversations around environmental racism and class concerns, and how you could offer insights and how your work addresses that, offers insights into how artists talk about environmental concerns.
Yeah. Uh, at the core of it, I care a lot about other people, and I care on, I try to care as much as I can on as many levels as I can. So on a more like interpersonal level, on a social justice level, like through like all of those, strata, and I don't think that. I don't think that environmentalism is what I let me think about this.
Mhm,
What I want to be careful of always is in any social justice movement or any kind of environmental movement, there is a way that, and I feel like this is a very, maybe it's not exclusive to white people, but, like people of European descent, I think that there is sometimes this idea that in order to have control over something or in order to participate, you must know, and
mhm,
I think that a lot of times, and that might be a little bit too vague right now, but I think that a lot of times that can lead to this idea that if somebody is not you know recycling all of their plastic bottles or something like that, that they don't care and therefore they're ignorant, or something like that, like leading to that kind of thing. When really, I don't think that that kind of knowledge is the best way to search for environmental justice for anybody. It really is about, you know, if you care about people or you care about the environment, then you should be caring about other people, because that's the whole reason we care in the first place. And by people, I definitely am inclusive of things non-human as well.
mhm,
So like I, I think that to think about like to care versus to know, and like
mhm.
what the difference is between that and how you enact things.
Thank you. Oh, I
Yeah.
really appreciated that response. To care versus to know. And if we can put ourselves in the spaces to care, that is infinitely better. So thank you for those words. Um, Something that Jamie Nares wrote in the chat said that they would love to discover the map of Same Seas Island in a hotel lobby, a sight to see pamphlets, etc. Have you made multiples of the maps?
Yeah, I have digital prints of it, and Jamie, I have like definitely designed a visitor center for Same Seas Island, and I am really interested in being able to show some of that work. Like specifically, we've talked about making a video for an instructional video for Sameseas who are leaving the island, and what kind of world they should expect outside of a utopia. I think it'd be really interesting. Yeah.
Mhm.
Something else that I wanted to bring up, Zoe, in relation to what we were talking about before, and like also with queer ecology, is you know, um, I, with Catherine Yusuf's writing, like I've definitely
Mhm.
been referencing that. So that's A
Mhm.
Billion Black Anthropocenes or None, and this idea of extraction, and also like looking at the African diaspora and
Mhm.
slavery as like also extraction. But I was also thinking about Kathy Cohen's work, Punks, Bull Daggers, and Welfare
Yeah.
Queens.
Yeah.
And, her idea that, queerness should be about one's relation to power and not about a homogenized identity.
Mhm.
And so I've been really, trying to apply that to the way that I'm thinking about queer ecology and environmental justice. Because, it can be that, you know, even whether whatever her sexuality is, like like a black woman's existence is queer because because it is strange, or because it is sort of like rejected by like a larger culture and like power of structure, and her relation to power.
Mhm.
um so yeah, thinking about that too, and framing it, because I don't, like queer can be sometimes used in a way that can put into people's imagination that it still is like very much in relationship to whiteness. And
Mhm.
I just want to be really careful and clear about
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
So
Thanks. Thanks, James. Thank you. This relates to another question, because you're talking about power, right? Queer in relationship to power, queer ecology and its relationship to power. The work that you made in Iceland, the energy, it's called Energy for the Land, in which you generated electricity with the bike, right?
mhm,
Um, you We're going to go back to extraction, and you position yourself in relationship to these larger companies or organizations. You at one point described Iceland as being colonized by companies in a sense, and I
mhm.
thought that was such an interesting statement to make. But how did you connect with local communities or organizations to make that work? And I also would love for you to just talk about you as the individual in relationship to a system or a structure that's bigger, right? That has power, right? And even you as an individual related to a community that has a different kind of power.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, that was the first time that I'd really delved into being in a community, and I had the really, I don't even know, like she was this amazing person that I met, who, as soon as I got there and told, other people like at the LGBT center of Iceland or whatever, that I was doing work on power structures, they were like, "Oh, do you know Anna Christian's daughter?" I was like, "No, who's that?" And it was this, trans woman who just so happened to be an engineer for the power companies, so being able to make connections that way, but also through local, artist networks and stuff. But the weird thing about it there is, like, there's still a phone book, and or there still was then, and I was told by people, Icelanders don't care, just call them, so I would just look people up and just like call people and talk to them about stuff in order to make connections to, especially the artists that had worked on the protest for the Alcoa plant. And I don't know how I position myself, next to um, these corporations. I think I'm like just trying to understand kind of the relationship, or maybe even like the amount of not caring that it takes to kind of be and could I call them an extractionist,
Mhm.
but Alcoa was one, but I was just doing some research before this. There's like a ton of Bitcoin mining server spaces. Anything that we have, like smelting aluminum, or having a server space, or Bitcoin mining, or whatever, that takes a lot of electricity, is going to wind up in that space.
Mhm.
Without much regard for really caring for things. But you always have to look like you do.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, thank you. A couple of people have made comments in the chat. And they aren't questions, but I want to definitely read them so that if you want to respond to them. Chelsea has written, can you talk about the process that goes into planning and creating a new series? So that's the question. But
Mhm.
also that your work is exciting because it doesn't stick to one material or theme while keeping a through line, a strong through line. And Tim Dowd has a statement, and he says, it is interesting to consider the camouflage and then makeup in the context of the work, particularly as we consider what you say about rural and urban spaces?
Yeah. Well, Chelsea, thank you. I have material ADD, and I don't, I like being able to do a lot of different things, and I've been pretty. I started out as a pretty crafty kid. I wouldn't say artsy, but crafty, and so I learned how to sew, and I love to draw and all of those things, and it feels good, and I do have a more of a film digital art background, and these past like 5 years or so, I just want to make things that I can touch while I'm making them that is not a keyboard. And so that's been part of that. But, I'm also, thinking a lot about virtual reality right now. So maybe I'll go back. And Tim, camouflage and makeup in the context of the work, particularly as we consider what you say about rural and urban spaces. I think that like it goes back to this idea of queering things, or like not, trying not to exclusively understand like wilderness as being natural and urban environments as being um, unnatural. And we have Lamont and I have talked about moving, doing some of this series, in different places, so that we're not just using this, like represented sort of like rural slash uh, um, wilderness kind of space, because I think it is, true. There's just I think for a lot of like LGBTQ people, there's still plenty of things to be, scared of in a city,
Mm-hmm.
so,
Mm-hmm.
and discrimination, but.
Yeah. Well, we are around the time, our stopping point, but I would love to end with joy. You brought up joy when you were talking about the Same Seas map series. I'd like to ask you, what's your joy in the environment?
Um, I um, I spent most of the pandemic making drawings of mountains, and I'm not sure if anyone is ever going to see them. Maybe Zoe has seen one of them, but I love a mountain. I love something that like the ocean is fine, but it doesn't really do it for me. But I really just love being in like next to inside alongside something that's just enormous, and that where I can like really understand the complexity of the world that we live in a scale that is kind of confounding.
All right. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you, James. I'll join you on a mountain trek. Thank you so much for sharing your ideas and your artwork with us and all of your research. And everyone in the audience on SteamYard and on YouTube, thanks for joining us this afternoon. And we hope that you've enjoyed seeing climate change. As you learned on Friday, this is the first of many that will happen. It will be an annual symposium. So thank you, and please enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.